Hey, welcome back to the show, Matt Flex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and today is Friday, which means it is question and answer day. One of my favorite days of the week, besides Monday. Friday and Mondays are probably my favorite days of the week. But anyway, let's get into the questions. And before we do, as always, please make sure to share this out to anybody that you think would be interested in the content within this episode or any of my previous episodes. That will help spread the word about the show. And also follow me on Instagram if you are on social media, or if you're on Instagram, you can follow me at rachelgregory.cns. That's where I'm most active on social media. And if you're interested in more content, you can go to my website, metflexlife.com. Tons of resources and recipes and lots of things there. Also, my programs, my nutrition and exercise programs, you can find them there as well. All right, let's get into the questions for today. All right, first question. Causes of bloating after eating. I start the day with a flat stomach and end it feeling pregnant. Oh man, okay. So I feel like a lot of people can relate to this. I can definitely relate to this. So starting the day with a flat stomach is definitely normal. And then obviously going throughout the day and your stomach becoming not as flat is also normal as well. That's just because you start to eat, you start to drink. But I would say what's not normal is ending the day feeling pregnant and then also feeling severe bloat after you eat. So a little bit of bloating after you eat is probably okay. But if you are constantly bloated after you eat, there's probably something going on there. And it's not normal, but it is very common. So there are a few common causes of bloating that I'm going to go over. There's actually, how many do I have here? I think I have 8 in particular. Common causes of bloating. So I'm going to go over these. And if you maybe take some notes, and if you think any of these relate to you, or if you feel like there's some light bulbs going off as I'm talking about some of these things, then definitely, I would definitely, think about maybe addressing some of these, maybe one at a time instead of all at once. So these are just a few of the common causes of bloating. It's not an extensive list, but hopefully this should help give you a little bit more insight into what might be going on. So the first most common cause of bloating, and something that's actually might seem very obvious, but a lot of people don't realize this, is not chewing your food enough. So we have digestive enzymes that are produced in our stomach, pancreas, and our mouth. Specifically within our saliva. So if you are eating super fast and you swallow after just a few chews or bites, you're not giving these digestive enzymes a chance to actually do their job and to break down your food, right? So as a result, digestion can be impaired just from the start. And this will make it harder for your body to actually absorb any of the nutrients that you are consuming as well. So not just causing bloating, but also just not allowing you to absorb the nutrients within the food you're eating. So this is one of the most common ones, right? Not chewing your food enough. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize too is that digestive enzymes actually start to be produced when you actually start thinking about the food. So other senses start coming. So if you're cooking and you start to smell the food, you will start to produce digestive enzymes. If you go out to a restaurant and you order your food and you anticipate it coming, you start to produce digestive enzymes within your mouth, within your saliva, and that starts the process of digestion, just thinking about the food. So one common cause, this is kind of going off on a tangent, but something a lot of people don't think about is if you go from like doing something to immediately eating food, like there's no preparation involved in between. Maybe you just take the food out of the microwave, you take the food out of the fridge, microwave it, and eat it like within 2 minutes. If you don't give your body enough time to actually start to produce those enzymes, and then on top of that, you're not chewing your food enough, it's kind of like a double whammy. So that's something to just kind of become more mindful of as you think about, like when you start to eat your food, is not just chewing enough, but also just giving yourself enough time to think about the act of eating, because that in itself starts the digestive process, right? Another thing that is common is that some people can also lack the necessary amounts of these digestive enzymes that you need to actually properly break down your food. So I'm not going to go into too much detail in this episode because I actually did talk all about digestive enzyme supplementation in episode 22. I did a deep dive into all things digestive enzymes. So I will link that in the show notes. You can check that out if you feel like this is something that you might be struggling from. And then something else that relates to digestive enzymes and another common cause of bloating and issues with digestion would be drinking too much fluids while you're eating. So if you are, chugging a bunch of water, or it doesn't have to be water, it can be any type of fluid while you're eating or right before or right after, this can actually dilute those digestive enzymes so they can't actually fully do their job to break down your food because of this dilution factor. So if you're, chugging a bunch of water, if you're just drinking a lot while you're eating, that can be something that may be impairing your ability to digest the foods you're consuming, which in turn could cause bloating. The next one would be eating in a stressed out state or focused on something else while you're eating. So if you're eating in a stressed out state, this comes back to we've talked about this in the past, being in that sympathetic versus parasympathetic state. So sympathetic is kind of that flight or fight mode. This is like when you're working out or you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, which most of us don't do these days, but that is like your fight or flight mode, right? And then the parasympathetic state is known as your rest and digest mode. So you want to make sure that you are as best you can be in this parasympathetic state, because that's where you will basically be optimized to digest the food that you're consuming, right? So if you are super stressed out while you're eating, if you're eating while you're like working or on the phone or whatever you're doing, if it's a stressed out state and you're eating food while you're doing that, that in itself is going to impair digestion. So I would definitely think about that. And then also if you're focused on something else while you're eating, so if you're scrolling through social media on your phone, guilty of that for sure. I know a lot of us are. Or if you're, watching TV while you're eating, these are distracting you from actually focusing on digestion, right? So we're focusing on your food. So that would be another kind of common cause that a lot of people don't think about is, doing other things while you're eating and not focusing on kind of being in the moment of consuming your food and enjoying your food. A next common cause would be vegetables. So veggies can be a very common cause of bloating, and I'm not going to dive too much into this in this episode because I actually go over in detail a bunch of different tips and tricks related to vegetables, the different types of vegetables, how to cook your vegetables to help avoid bloating and to help kind of mitigate some of the distress that can happen if you're eating too many vegetables, or if you're eating vegetables if you're not properly cooking them, or if you're consuming a bunch of vegetables that actually are more common for causing bloating versus some that aren't. I dive into that in episode 22. So I will link that in the show notes so you can check that out. And then another common cause, or not, this one probably isn't as common. I mean, it might be, but it's not as common as the other ones. Low stomach acid. So if you think that you may have low stomach acid, there's actually a few tests that you can do at home to test for this. And I'm not going to dive into this in this episode because I actually did an entire episode where I take you step by step on how to test your stomach acid at home. There's actually 2 at-home tests. The first one is called the baking soda test, and the second one is called the HCl challenge test. So I detail those, literally take you step by step through how to do them in episode 12. So I will link that in the show notes if you feel like that might be something that's causing you to have issues with digestion or bloating, and it's something that you haven't looked into in the past. Definitely check out that episode. Again, episode 12. I'll link it in the show notes. The next common cause is this is another kind of obvious one that a lot of us don't think about, but potentially eating too large of portion sizes, right? So if you're eating too much food or a large quantity of food at once, that in itself can cause bloating. So a good rule of thumb is to basically eat until you are 80% full rather than 100% full. That might help with both digestion and not feeling super bloated afterwards. Another common cause of bloating would be suffering from food allergies or intolerances to common foods. So if you eat a food that you're intolerant to, it can actually cause excess gas production, which can in itself cause bloating and other symptoms. So some of the most common sources of food allergies and intolerances are probably lactose intolerance, which lactose is just the main carbohydrate in milk, fructose intolerant, being intolerant to eggs. So if you notice that you have some gas or bloating after you eat eggs for a period of time, if it always happens, you might be intolerant to those. And then wheat and gluten. So many people are intolerant to gluten, which is the protein within wheat and spelt and barley and other grains. So those can be common food intolerances, which could be contributing to issues with digestion and bloating. And then both lactose and fructose are actually a part of a larger group of what we call indigestible carbs or fiber, which are known as FODMAPs. So FODMAP intolerance is one of the most common causes of bloating and also abdominal pain. So I actually chat about this again in episode 22, where I talk all about veggies. I go into the different FODMAP FODMAP foods and how those or why those could be causing some bloating. So I'm not going to dive into that, but I'll link that episode in the show notes. But some of the common high FODMAP foods, just so that you're aware of, again, I talked about this in episode 22, but wheat, onions, garlic, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, artichokes, beans, apples, pears, and sugar alcohols are the most common FODMAPs. So if you have a lot of those in your diet and you are suffering from a lot of bloating, you can't figure it out, it might be advantageous to maybe try taking a few of those out or limiting those to see if that helps. And then the next one would be too much sugar alcohols. So consuming too many sugar alcohols. So sugar alcohols are found naturally in some fruits and vegetables and are also commercially produced to be used as ingredients in various foods and beverages. So the most common sugar alcohols are sorbitol, maltitol, xylitol, and erythritol. Erythritol, I can never say that word. And then basically what happens is the bacteria in your large intestine actually digest these sugar alcohols and can produce excessive gas, especially if you're sensitive to them. So I would say if you are consuming a lot of sugar alcohols, then definitely try to avoid those. Specifically, xylitol, sorbitol, and maltitol tend to be the ones that cause a lot of digestive issues for some people who are sensitive to them. Erythritol may be better tolerated, but it can also cause some other issues too, especially in larger doses. So I would just be kind of cognizant of that. And then also chewing gum is actually another cause of bloating for two reasons. So most gum is actually made with sugar alcohol. So usually sorbitol and maltitol are the most common. So that in itself can cause bloating, especially if you are chewing a lot of gum every single day. And then on top of that, just chewing gum in general can actually cause bloating because of the gas that's produced. So gas actually builds up in your digestive tract when undigested foods get broken down or when you swallow air. So that's kind of how that happens. So if you are chewing a bunch of gum, you're actually swallowing a lot of air, and that in itself can cause bloating and issues there. So that would be one thing. If you're consuming a lot of sugar alcohols and then in addition, or you're also consuming a lot of gum or chewing a lot of gum throughout the day, I think about probably taking that back a notch and seeing if that helps. And then lastly, this is something that I tend to do a lot, is consume too many carbonated beverages. So I'm personally guilty of this because I love seltzer water. I love any, bubbly water. But that in itself has gas and air in it. So if you're drinking tons of that can cause some unwanted and unnecessary bloating as well. I know that if I consume too many cans or bottles of seltzer water, I tend to have a lot more bloating than I would if I didn't. So hopefully that helps give you a little bit of insights into the common causes of bloating. If you feel like any of those might have, put off a light bulb in your head to kind of address those, I would just take them one by one, right? Don't try to address everything at once because you'll just be overwhelmed, but just kind of go back and listen to that again and take notes on a few of the things that might be relevant to you, and then see if you can help mitigate some of those by some of the tips I gave. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, the next question. What is the difference between intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding? Okay, so in general, intermittent fasting is really just a broad term, and there's lots of different types of intermittent fasting. So, a few examples, the most common one would probably be a 16-8 fast. So, that's fasting for 16 hours, eating for 18 hours. This is known as the 16-8 method. It could also be another common one would be 18-6. So, that's fasting for 18 hours. Feasting for 6 hours. Those are probably the most common forms of intermittent fasting when you hear someone talk about intermittent fasting, but there's a ton of other types as well. There's probably like hundreds of different types of intermittent fasting, and a lot of like ones that people kind of just make up, which is totally fine. Like it all kind of falls under this category of fasting. So it's really just like, it doesn't really matter what they're called. It's just kind of how you implement them into your own life, right? And what works for you. But I would say maybe a few other common types of intermittent fasting. There's one known as the 5-2 diet. So that involves eating normally 5 days a week and then restricting your calorie intake to like, say 500 to 600 calories for the other 2 days of the week. So that's a little bit more aggressive. So that would be the 5-2 approach. Another common approach is known as alternate day fasting. So that would literally just be what it says in the name. It's your alternating days of fasting and eating. So you eat quote unquote normally one day, and then the next day you do a 24-hour fast. Or some people, maybe they only incorporate a few hundred calories within that 24-hour fasting day. It really depends what your goals are, right? And then also how you define breaking a fast. It's very different for different people, right? And then you would just alternate going back and forth between that 1 day eating, 1 day fasting, so on and so forth. Another common method is called the warrior diet. So this is like eating just a small amount of maybe like fruits and veggies in the morning and then eating like a really large meal in the afternoon. So it's kind of like an OMAD type of intermittent fasting. OMAD means eating one meal a day. So that's more of an aggressive, I would say, intermittent fasting protocol, and gets more into like, so that and an alternate day fasting will be more into like the extended fasting. I mean, maybe not into the extended fasting, but extended fasting I would probably define as over like 36 hours probably. So that's just how I look at it. Like intermittent fasting, if you're going over 24 hours to 36 hours, probably not like intermittent fasting anymore, but really like it doesn't matter, to be honest. Like it doesn't matter how you define these things. It's really just finding a method that works for you or not. Like if fasting doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. So anyway, now I'm just going off on a tangent. A few other methods of intermittent fasting would be protein sparing modified fast, so PSMF days. Those are actually, that's actually a really great tool, especially if you're in a fat loss phase, especially if you are following a ketogenic protocol. I like to incorporate PSMF days personally if I'm in a fat loss phase or a cut, and we also use that as a tool in my Keto for Women program. A few other methods are fat fasting, fast mimicking diets. There's tons of different types of intermittent fasting. So again, intermittent fasting is just kind of this umbrella of the different types of fasting. And then when we're talking about time-restricted feeding or time-restricted eating, it's a form of intermittent fasting where you're basically consuming your meals within a certain number of hours each day or within a compressed eating window. So the most common time-restricted feeding is usually an 8-hour eating window and a 16-hour fasting window. Again, this is like most common. This goes back to what I just mentioned about that 16-8 protocol. So for example, you would, your eating window would be between like 12 p.m. This is an example, between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. And then your fasting window would be between like 8 p.m. and 11:59 a.m. the next day. So that would be an example of a 16-8 protocol. You could also do, an 18-6 protocol or even like a 24 protocol. So there's so many different types of protocols. But again, it really just comes down to, it doesn't really matter what the differences between them are. I mean, it matters what the differences between them are, but it doesn't really matter like whether you call it intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating or time-restricted feeding. It's all a form of fasting in itself. And it really just comes down to what works for you, right? And finding and experimenting with different things. And yeah, so that would be my answer to that question about the difference between intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. Okay, the last question is related to fasting as well. So, someone said, does training outside of your eating window while doing intermittent fasting impact your body in a negative way? They said, let's say my eating window is from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., but I can only train at 9 a.m. or 8 p.m. Will I still recover? Will I lose muscle? Okay, so I would say it all depends on, first of all, what your goals are, right? Like, is your main goal, is it, fat loss? Is it building muscle? Is it just maintaining and feeling good during your workouts? Like, what's your goal? That's always going to be the first question I ask. The next question, especially when it comes to fasting and training, is really just, how do you feel during your training session? So if you said that if your eating window is from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., and if you trained at 9 a.m., for example, then that means that you're going into your training fasted. So how do you feel when you're training fasted? Do you feel good? Do you feel like you have a good amount of energy? Some people feel great when they fasted and they love training fasted. Some people don't. So it really just comes down to what allows you to optimize your training session, right? Is it going in faster, or is it going in with a little bit of food in your system? So I would say that, in general, if you are training at 9 a.m. fasted and then your eating window starts at 11 a.m., that's not too far off. So as long as you get a good quality meal in with a good amount of protein at that 11 a.m. mark, then I think that you should be good. That gives you because if you're training at 9, say you have it's an hour session, then if you eat at 11, you'll be perfectly fine there. I would say if you, on the opposite end of things, if you said your eating window is between 11 and 7. So then if you train at 8 p.m., that's, you'll have a ton of food in your system to train at 8. So again, it all comes back to, what works for you. I would say that either one of those works in terms of, recovery wise. And you said, will I still recover? Will I lose muscle? I can't speak to that exactly because I don't know the other factors that are going on kind of outside of your eating window, because there's other things that go into recovery, obviously, and there's other things that go into building muscle, how you're training, all of that. So I would say just in general, as long as you're recovering well and you're getting a good amount of protein and a good amount of quality food in before or after your session in the morning, and then obviously before your session if you're training at night, then you should be fine. But I would say, just kind of think about exactly what your goals are, and then think about also how you feel during your training and how you're recovering, how you're sleeping, all of that. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, that's all the questions we got for today. If you're enjoying these Q&A sessions or Q&A podcasts, please make sure to share it out with your friends and family. Also, you can take a screenshot of the episode, post it on Instagram, and tag me at rachelgregory.cns. And I will be posting more question boxes on my stories on Instagram, so make sure you're following me there if you have any other questions. And that's all I got. I'll see you next time.